Good evening. My name is Joseph Berger, and I am the Theater Operations and Events Manager at Film Forum, an independent nonprofit four-screen cinema in Manhattan's West Village, now in its 51st year. So I'd like to welcome all of you on behalf of the theater. And firstly, thank you to Larissa Tokmakova and St. Anne's School for putting this event together. Tonight's discussion is on Traylor, Chasing Ghosts, directed by Jeffrey Wolf, which I'm sure most of you have seen by now. Film Forum was proud to present this film at our theater for in-person screenings last month and earlier this month. And the film continues to run on our virtual cinema platform. I encourage all of you to visit filmforum.org and check out our dynamic selection of premieres, including documentaries, world cinema, and American independence, as well as our restored classics. So here to say a little bit more about Film Forum and our mission is our Deputy Director, Sonia Chung. I'd love to welcome Sonia. Hi, Sonia.
Hey there. Hi, Joe. Thanks so much for that introduction. Hi, everybody. Hello, St. Anne's community. We are so delighted to have been able to premiere this film, Traylor, Chasing Ghosts, at the theater and also virtually. And hoping many of you, some of you know us, Film Forum, our theater on West Houston Street in the West Village, and of course know that we were closed from March of 2020 through April of 2021. So we've been open now almost a couple of months and are excited to be back. But one of the great things that happened during the closure, when all of us arts organizations had to kind of pivot to doing other things, was that we were able to bring these screenings, these virtual screenings, to audiences who were not either able or was challenging to come to the theater. And so schools like yours is one of those places, those communities that we've been able to bring our programming. So we're really excited to be partnering with St. Anne's. Thanks to Larissa, your fearless art teacher, for championing this and working with us. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Truth be told, I've been present for these Q&As with Jeffrey and Sam a few times now, and yet I still am really looking forward to hearing what they have to say, because it's always illuminating and fun, and because I know Larissa has prepared some terrific questions. So Larissa, if you want to join us, I'll let you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. On behalf of the art department, I thank all of you who are joining us tonight. And please do enjoy. It should be a terrific conversation. Thank you. And I have no doubts you enjoyed the film.
Well, I'd love to welcome the filmmaker of Traylor, Chasing Ghosts to the webinar, Mr. Jeffrey Wolf. This is Jeffrey's second feature-length documentary. Previously, he made the award-winning James Castle Portrait of an Artist, a film that delves into the life and creative process of Castle as told by family, artists, and members of the deaf community. Jeffrey has also made short films about the artists James Sunford Thomas, Martin Ramirez, and Elijah Pierce. Jeffrey's articles, art reviews, and photographs have appeared in numerous publications, and as a feature film editor, Jeffrey is recognized for his work with prominent directors like Arthur Penn, Sidney Lumet, and John Waters. Hi, Jeffrey. It's great to see you again.
Guys. Hello, Larissa. Sonia. Sam. Oh, Sam's not here yet.
Sam, yeah, well, let's welcome Sam now. Come on in, Sam Pollard. Sam Pollard is the executive producer of Traylor, Chasing Ghosts. Sam is a very accomplished feature film and television video editor and documentary producer and director. Between 1990 and 2010, Sam edited many of Spike Lee's narrative features. And the two have co-produced a number of documentaries together, including Four Little Girls, which Sam also edited, and which we opened here at Film Forum in 1997. And When the Levees Broke, a four-part series about Hurricane Katrina that won a Peabody and 3 Emmy Awards. In 2019, Sam co-directed the 6-part series Why We Hate, which premiered on the Discovery Channel. In 2020, he completed MLK FBI, which premiered at the Toronto Film Festival and was shortlisted for the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature. And most recently, Sam directed and produced the documentary Black Art in the Absence of Light, another wonderful documentary which offers an illuminating introduction to the world of some of the foremost Black visual artists working today, including Carrie James Marshall, Carrie Mae Weems, and Faith Reingold. Hi, Sam. It's a pleasure and honor to have you with us tonight.
Thank you for having me, Joe. Thanks, Larissa, Sonia. Great seeing you. Wonderful being here.
Well, let's begin. Sonia, I think you're going to duck out and come back to say goodbye in a little bit.
Indeed. Enjoy, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. And I do, again, encourage all of you to submit some questions into writing. In writing. Larissa and I will be happy to read some of those questions for you. My first question, though, is to Larissa. I'm just curious how you came upon the film and your general thoughts on the film and why you chose to bring this to your faculty and your students at St. Anne's.
This past year, the entire school has been reflecting and undergoing the curriculum review. This is where we all stopped, paused, and thought about what we teach and how we teach it. And as part of it, we're sharing projects. And one of our teachers, Leon Weird, introduced a wonderful project for his middle schoolers. And it was based on Traylor's work. Of course, the discussion followed, and another colleague, Andy Keating, said, and by the way, I just know somebody who made a wonderful documentary. And as a department, we thought we absolutely must see it, and we must bring it to students, faculty, staff, everyone in the community, because we just, as artists, and all of us are artists in our department, we absolutely love his work because it's something which is incredibly authentic and deep, and it talks to every single one of us as an artist and as a human.
You know, I just want to jump in here. I think authenticity is a really important word that describes Bill Traylor's work. And when Jeffrey introduced me to it a few years back, that's the first thing I said to myself. This is very authentic work, very special, very unique for this gentleman who came out of Alabama and lived in Montgomery, Alabama, to create in such a late period of his life, such fabulous and such a large amount of work, which I think is extremely both creative and very special, but also gives us insight into the times that he lived in. You know, during this time when segregation was at its zenith in American history. So, I applaud the fact that Jeffrey, loved this man, loved his work, and wanted to do this film about him. And I'm glad to have been connected with it.
So, I want to say one thing too, is that was actually my first question for Sam in thinking about all this, is that, early on when this was developing, I showed Sam the script, and then he saw the work and the film, and very similar, within a year or so of itself, hearing about Bill Traylor for the first time. So I wondered what your first impression was and whether you thought this film could actually get made.
Well, Jeff, I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I know the struggles and the challenges of getting a documentary funded, getting it shot, getting it edited, and I knew that it would get made. The question is, how long will it take? I mean, and that means you have to have, as a filmmaker, and this, a certain level of tenacity in saying, I'm going to get it done by hook or by crook, which is what you did, man. I mean, you never gave up. And that's the important thing to remember about making these films that are special and that are documentaries, that we always have to say to ourselves, we have to keep going. We have to keep pushing up the boulder up the hill, because 9 times out of 10, we know that, in your case, that people are not going to just drop money on you. And I've had that happen to me too, where I just had to really figure out how to find the money, how to piece together the money, how to piece together the shooting schedule, how to piece together the subjects I want to interview. And basically it takes time. So I never did not think it was going to get made. I knew you would make it. I just didn't know how long it would take.
And correct me if I misheard this. Sam, did you say that it was Jeffrey that brought Bill Traylor's work to your attention in the first
place?
I
had never, I might have seen something, but I didn't know who it was.
Wow.
So
okay, so
really...
So now I have to ask Jeffrey, how did you come upon Bill Traylor's work? When, how, and what led to this, to
Right.
making this
Well,
film?
I mean, that's a question I get asked a lot, and I'll answer it a couple different ways. But specifically, there was a show called Black Folk Art in America that happened at the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington D.C. in 1982. I had already had my wife and Jeannie and I had already been involved in knowing about artists like Bill Traylor for 6 or 7 years from college. But when I saw Bill Traylor's work for the first time, I couldn't get it out of my head. I mean, it was remarkable. It hadn't really been seen by anybody before that show, and the challenge, as Sam was saying, I mean, it took 10 years to make this film, but not like I was in the room for 10 years trying to figure it out. It took, having a passion for the work and finding a way of telling the story are two different things. And it took a really long time to figure out what the path was to not just showing the drawings, but be able to tell a story around those drawings. And so I think once I realized that Bill Traylor had grown up and lived for 80 some odd years, even before traveling north and then coming back south. But the point is, he lived in a 40-mile radius of his whole life. And so I started doing research about the history of that area, and I was able to find enough historical information that was interesting that definitely would have been in his purview. He would have heard about it in some way or maybe experienced it personally. And once I was able to kind of put those two worlds together, then I was able to find the other ways of telling the story, digging for the archival material, which takes time. There are two very important finds that we made. One was the color photography by Rudy Burkhart of the town of Montgomery, the city of Montgomery in 1941, which really brings to life the place. And second, some photographs by a woman named Mary Morton Kep, who in 1890 on glass negatives shot in the fields that Bill Traylor had literally worked in Dallas County. And so once that stuff started building up, I knew I was on my way. And as Sam said, there's always money and all those other things that, slow things up here and there. But I went looking for the family. I found the grave. I helped them orchestrate a funeral, laying of the ground of the stone, which, became a big scene in the film. So all those things kind of work together. I'll keep going because I was talking about this today. There are kind of four quadrants in the film, and that I wanted to tell the story through, and that was dance, music, storytelling, and conjure culture, which is like hoodoo culture. And because I felt that the African American, those four things were some of the biggest contributions from the African American culture, and those things all appeared in Bill Traylor's work consistently. So I was able to kind of find the structure that way as well.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I thought, which in hearing about Sam and in making a documentary, and certainly working in modern day and being a creative artist in modern day, whether it's running a nonprofit movie theater or an art school or making a film. I mean, we are all so concerned with money and financing and how to create, and then also how to share what we create. This is a man who didn't think about any of that.
Mm-hmm.
This is a man who just created. He just sat on a street corner and made a huge amount of work, which I always found really fascinating. That in terms of authenticity, that word that we've used, he wasn't making work. I mean, he wasn't making work to make money. He wasn't making work to become famous. And I imagine his legacy, and the kind of investigative work that you had to do to learn about his legacy and bring it to life was extensive and vast and at times daunting. So can we talk a little bit more about the research process and how you reached out to family and descendants of Traylor?
Well, just to answer a little bit of what you just said, the one thing we never figured out and will never figure out, and from artist's point of view, is, what was that transcendent moment where he puts together his history, his memory, his ancestry all together and kind of blurts it out over a 3-year period. I mean, no one will ever kind of, settle on that idea. The process, wow. I'm a film editor by trade, so I was often doing this in between. I had assistants who were assembling, but the most important thing is the film is pretty much scripted, and that was very helpful. And I know that sounds weird for a documentary. Sam can talk a little bit about that as well. But what you do is you kind of structure something, and then you put, I'm going to have this famous person who is one of the greatest art historians in the world, and this is what he's going to say here, here, and here. And then you hope that when you go out and you do the interview that, and you talk about those things with them, that your research was right and that he's or she's going to give you those answers. And if they don't, then it's a discovery moment. And Sam and I were talking about this yesterday. It's like, all good intentions in documentaries usually turn into something else somewhere along the way, and that was true of this as well. I mean, the dancer, the wonderful dancer, Jason Samuel Smith, he wasn't supposed to be in the movie. It was supposed to be the real Bill Robinson and the real Snake Hips performing in Warner Brothers and Paramount films from the 40s that were made for Black audiences. But it became too overwhelming to buy those clips. And so, I found this great dancer and showed him the work of Bill Traylor. And I didn't have to show him the work of Bill Robinson or Snake Hips. He knew it all. And so I was standing in the stage saying, do Snake Hips and do this and do that. And he just put this montage of work together, And so it's like, it's all moments. You kind of, somebody asked me once about editing too. You probably are making a million decisions over the course of making any film, and but you just keep piling them on and move forward.
Yeah, I like how documentaries, there's a lot of happy accidents as you're crafting a documentary, or a lot of decisions are made by the resources that you have available to you that you don't have available to you. So Sam, my question is,
but let me just jump in a second. One of the things I think is important to say, though, it's not just in documentaries. It's in the idea of creation.
Sure.
When you create a painting, when you create a piece of music, when you create a film, be it a fiction film or a documentary, there's always the happy accidents. You can plan to the nth degree. But what I always say to filmmakers when I'm working on a film is, when I'm talking to my students, you should always be prepared for the things that are happy accidents. Don't run away from those things. Don't get locked into, well, I wrote this in the script and I have to do it exactly this way. Because if you let yourself be open to those happy accidents, something special can come out, that you may not have considered. So that's one of the things.
Right. I mean, the other thing I'll argue with you on that is, coming out of a lot more narrative films, is there's always a script that you can kind of rely on. Yes, you're redoing things. A documentary is, sometimes I talk to people who don't know what the film's about until they're halfway into the.
And I would challenge that. It's like I'm sitting here now working on the treatment for a new book based on a book by Charles Blow, and I'm writing out just what you did, Jeff.
Right.
I'm writing out how Act 1 should be, how Act 2 should be, how Act 3 should be. Now, I know that'll change, but I still feel like I have to create a frame.
Right.
Sure, you have a script. I mean,
that's true. That's true.
Joe mentions all the films I edited for Spike. One of the things that was always interesting about working on Spike's films, like Bamboozled, to give an example of Jungle Fever,
right,
there would be sequences, and there'd be sequences that it would just be one sentence. We're going to have a montage here. This guy, and then all of a sudden, you and I had to sit there and figure out how to make it rise like a cake. But the other thing I want to say here about Jeff's film, about Chasing Ghosts, is that one of the things that I think that's invaluable in terms of what we learned from this film is that we not only learn about Traylor's work and his art, but through his art, what Jeffrey was able to do was really give us a real window into the history of what was happening in that community back then. And it's a sort of an interesting kind of connection. Jeffrey and I were talking yesterday about this new film that I'm getting ready to get involved with as a co-director. And I thought about it yesterday after I left Jeff. I said, wow, there's like a straight connection, because he went down to Alabama, spent a lot of time, researching, digging into Traylor's life and then the history of Alabama and the fact that it's in Lowndes County. And I'm getting ready to go down to Alabama to do something about Lowndes County too, from another perspective. So it's interesting how this thing is like in a circle, how you keep coming back to certain things historically. And like all filmmakers, I said, well, I got to go back and look at Jeff's film now, because maybe there's some things I want to try to steal and shape in my film.
Well, may I jump in very quickly?
Yeah,
I found it remarkable how, Sam, you just spoke about this historical transformation, and parallel to that, Jeffrey, what you weave in as a theme is the transformation of Traylor's recognition as an artist, right? As an artist of incredible skill. Very quick anecdote. When I came to this country in '94, I was introduced to his work. It was a gallery in Soho, Rika Moreska, who used to specialize in outsider art. And I saw his drawings for the first time ever in my life. And coming from pretty much a Soviet draconian education and not knowing anything about what does it mean outsider art, I was told that it was meant to be self-taught, the artist who is self-taught. And I was thinking, my God, of course, in a nutshell, how can you teach that? Traylor does. It is impossible to teach, and it is impossible to learn. You either have it or not. Like how ironic in a way. And of course now Traylor is one of the prominent American artists and exhibited in museums worldwide, highly respected. And that was also a very beautiful thread within the film, with what you were able to do. I just wanted to bring.
No, that's interesting, and I wouldn't say it was an easy road. I mean, because for economic, social, racial reasons, artists like Bill Traylor were left out of the canon of the 20th century. I mean, I think what we're experiencing now is a bit of a revival, in the sense of, because it's not just outsider. Like, if you notice, I never used the word outsider in the film once as a description of him. Some people say that he knew more about what was going on inside the world than most people did at the time. But I think that we're turning a page. That's actually, Sam just did this film with contemporary artists, and I was going to ask him. I'm going to look through my questions, because well, actually, I'm going to go back one step to something we were talking about a little earlier. I said a line to Sam yesterday about that. The South is a place. East, West, and North are nothing but directions, which is, really the centerpiece of the movie. And so, why is Montgomery the center of so many things? Going back to what Sam was talking about, why is his work important in a historical context, especially in a Southern Black African American history, and why is that relevant today? And like, why is what happens, the movie Sam's going down to work on, why are those moments being relived now, do you think? MLK, there were 5 movies last year that had the FBI spying on Black people, right? There was Fred Hampton and Martin Luther King and
Billie
Holiday, and it went on and on.
Yeah, what this is my perspective on it. The fact that people are digging into this history now, basically from the '60s, with MLK, FBI, with this Lowndes County project, it's now that it's so far away in terms of seeing it from a distance now, it makes it much more relevant. It's always hard to really look at something as a documentarian from a historical perspective if it only happened 5 or 6 years before, you know. And sometimes it takes 15, 20, 25 years for you to be able, and for me and others to be able to get a real sort of handle on it, to look at it from so many different perspectives. And that's what's happened. Because what I was saying to someone the other day is that's amazing that this period between the 60s, the mid 60s up into the 70s has become such a important part now of our history that people want to really understand and dig into and pull out. You know, if we had tried to do some of these films in the way we're telling them now in 1975, people would say, well, it's not relevant enough. It doesn't resonate enough. We're now 50 years past that, over 50 years past that. So it's become much more relevant and resonant now, you know. To look at and understand from a civil rights perspective, from an artistic perspective, you know, looking at, you know, with Black Art in the Absence of Light, looking at that exhibit that was at the Los Angeles Museum County of Art, you know, and the reverberations of it on artists, Black artists today, like a Jordan Castile or Carrie James Marshall or Kara Walker, you know. So it's you know, or, you know, Gates. You know, it's just fascinating how history now, how this, you can be so far away from something and how more relevant it becomes over time.
Yeah, and I mean, with this film, the Bill Traylor, he born in such an incredible time,
yeah,
and lived. I mean, you know, I think he was born in 1853.
Slavery.
Yeah, and the life he led and what he saw, particular to our history and American history. Yeah. What an incredible character to document and capture, to tell a story of the American experience.
And it's a real parallel. I mean, you really see the parallel. As you said, you know, Joe, he's born in slavery. He lives through emancipation, Reconstruction, the Jim Crow era. I mean, the Great Migration. This is American history.
Yeah.
Front and center.
There's an amazing question that's related that came in from one of our viewers, Leon Reed. He says, and this is a tough one. So, ready? He says, being a Black artist who lived in the American South the majority of his life between the 19th and 20th centuries, I find it curious that there are few religious or biblical symbols or stories that are ordinarily so common of artists from that place or time. Any theories as to why? So few religious or biblical symbols or stories.
In Bill Traylor specifically?
Yeah, I believe that's what Leon is saying, yes.
I mean, he wasn't a particularly religious person as far as I can tell, but there are ring shouts. I mean, I think I used one in a comparison to a baptism scene early on. And one of them, I think the best way I can answer this is that late in life, well into his 90s, he converted to Catholicism.
Oh, wow.
He was never religious his entire life, and he converted to Catholicism and belonged to a church in Montgomery that was a Black Catholic church that had all the saints and everything were you know, depicted as Black people, and they actually were responsible for his ultimate burial. It came, you know, out of that church. So I think I'm curious, 19th to 20th centuries, that means I think he means, I don't know, he would have to be pretty old to be 19th to 20th century if he lived. Does he say that he actually lived in the 19th century? No, he couldn't have, but that may be a typo of some sort. But I think every person who lived in a county like Lowndes County or Dallas County had two worlds in there. They had the conjure culture and they had the religious culture. And those two worlds lived on their shoulders and talked to each other and often contradicted each other. And it's not an area that I know that much about, but I know enough from other artists that have, you know, they feel that their art was all motivated from a religious place, because they didn't think they had the talent specifically to do what they were doing. So it had to be like a spiritually evoked thing. I hope that answered this question. I don't know. It's a good question.
Yeah. There's another question here, I think, more about process and about the process of making the film for both of you. This is from Eli Berliner. In what ways did Traylor's images inform the cinematic choices that you made? The music, the editing style, the cinematography, etc.
Well, I mean, that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. Is that it's a very. I'm going to answer that question by asking Sam a question as part of it, and we can answer it together, because documentary filmmaking is a form of curating, and especially when you're making something that's historically based, and so you're always faced with what to leave in, what to take out. Both Sam and I have both been editors before, and how often do we have to battle with subjectivity versus objectivity in terms of the choices we make? Do we have enough material to prove this point? So I think the best way I could answer that question is how I did a little bit earlier, is that I tried to build this on not on reading into anything, but seeing what's reflecting off of him. It's really an attempt to be a movie from his point of view. And so I don't ever go out of my way to interpret things that he does. Greg Tate talks about it because he has a great expertise in that kind of cultural referencing. But even he won't venture to guess what an arm with tree limbs coming out of it means. But I think that one of the key things that we kept in our mind is that these weren't individual drawings. They were a narrative. He was telling a whole story. And we just tried to back it up with as many interesting ways that we could show that story off. And, people ask me about the actors who are in it. They're playing narrators, they're playing silhouettes, they're reading, passages from Langston Hughes. It's everything is geared toward exactly what Eli is asking. We went out looking for ways to give a platform to the work. So yes, every edit is geared toward its music, to the music. It's the tap dancing was actually edited to the drawings. I mean, it's all very connected, I think. I mean, the movie's it took 10 years to make, so it's pretty dense in the connectivity part. So,
and Jeffrey, did you have any material that you could not include in a film for whatever reason?
Well, that's a very good question. Yes, and you can, and this is what I mean by curating. This film could be about appropriation. It could be about the family not getting not owning any of the pieces until later in life. I mean, those are important things, but to me, in the amount of time that I had to make the film, not the 10 years, but the time that the story I wanted to tell was about Bill Traylor. I didn't want to get into the politics of those things, so I left a lot of politics out.
Yeah, I would say, I would say that the thing to remember when you're making the film, as Jeffrey's done, you have to make directorial choices in terms of approach, in terms of style, in terms of how you want to articulate and present the story. Now, there would have been a time when a film like this about Traylor might have been just interviews and images from Traylor, and some stills from the period. But what Jeffrey did was to say, I'm going to raise the creative ante of this film. I'm going to take it to another level from an artistic and an aesthetic perspective. So by adding the dancer and editing with the images, by having the storytellers, which are like griots, telling the story, the way he framed it and shot it, the composition of it, the use of music throughout the film, the use of the voice of Zora and Langston, all adds to the notion that this is what I call the directorial vision, and helping the story be just not what I call another just ordinary historical doc. You take it to another level. And that's always a challenge for us as we make these historical docs. How do we make it unique and different so the audience says, oh, I got the information, which is always important, but it's been given to me in a way that's very interesting and very unusual, which I think is one of the successes of Bill Traylor chasing ghosts.
Now, may I ask you? I don't know. I'm speculating, but working with Jeffrey on Bill Traylor chasing ghosts, did it inspire you in any way to go ahead and direct Black Art, which was released on HBO in February and was invaluable source for our department to actually, we kept on coming to the film over and over again for references. But was it inspirational? I learned today you've known each other for 30 years. You work together very well.
The reality is with Jeff, this was Jeff's passion film, Black Art in the Absence of Light. I got hired to do that. It had been developed by someone else a few years before I got involved, and then I came on with the executive producers, Jackie Glover, who was formerly at HBO, and Henry Louis Gates, and we then had to sit down and figure out how to make this film. What was the vision of the film? And that we went around and around. So it was a different sort of process, I was hired to bring it on. Then I had to sort of bring what my creativity was to the table to make it come to life. So it was a different thing.
Yeah, but I would answer that even a little differently. We exchanged a lot of things. I used one of Sam's producers and cinematographer to work on my film. He might not know that I was doing this, but I was constantly telling him about Radcliffe Bailey, who is an artist who's in the movie, who ended up in Sam's movie.
That's true.
And we talked about Richard Powell, who's in my movie and is in your movie.
That's true.
And so it was interesting. It was interesting, and I think it will continue like that. I mean, I think
it's going to continue, man. Because I'm just telling you, I'm going to steal some stuff for this next one.
Yeah. So Sam, specifically, when did you jump on this project, Bill Traylor, with Jeff, and what kind of role did Sam play Jeff? I mean, how did he shape the film, if at all?
It was. I think Jeff was 7 years ago, or whenever you.
That was in the beginning of it. Yeah, I think something like that.
Yeah,
but I think in the last 3 or 4 years, since we were using a lot of the same people and we knew things, I would meet Sam once a month for breakfast, and I would tell him all my problems about what was going on, and he was sort of outside, kind of. He never really came into the room while we were working.
No.
But it was a perfect kind of relationship where you could kind of get away from the editing room and have somebody who you could just shoot the shit with and figure out what the issues are and how to solve certain things. I mean, we had a lot of huge money issues and ways of raising money, which Sam helped out with. And I mean, we had some really kind of interesting circumstances. I applied for an NEH grant that I did not get. And then I showed the film at the Smithsonian Museum, and people from the NEH were there. And they said, "Did you apply for an NEH grant? This film's terrific." And I said, "As a matter of fact, I did." And they went back and they looked at my grant, and they wrote me a couple days later and said, "We didn't think you could do it." And so they ended up giving me money to help pay for the music, which was a thorn in our side because it was so, we had 45 needle drops or something like that in the film. So Sam kept saying, "Take some of them out." But I mean, it's hard. So there's always something happening. But one thing Sam always, and he said this earlier, is that no matter what the problems were, he never believed that you couldn't solve them.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you solve them.
That's the process.
Yeah.
That's it.
But I wanted to ask Sam, because we've talked about your family and Georgia and Mississippi and things like that. So as a Black man in America, can you relate to Bill Traylor's story today? Are there some things about his life that ring true in relationships to stories, images, or cultural things you heard or did growing up?
Well, the answer is absolutely yes. I mean, ever since I turned 24, I think I've spent a tremendous amount of time in the South. both in Mississippi and Alabama. Not as much as in Georgia, maybe in the last 4 or 5 years in Georgia. And my family is, deeply rooted in the history of the South. And a lot of that stuff that I heard from the people in your film and the images of Trailer, those are the images that I grew up seeing and hearing about in terms of my grandfather and my grandmother and my uncles and my aunts. So to me, it's, but probably what I would say to you that it speaks really dearly to my personal family upbringing. Now, does it resonate with my children? I don't think so, because they haven't spent the kind of time you and I have spent in the South. So it definitely speaks to me every time I watch it, man. Every time.
This brings up something actually that Larissa and I spoke about via email today. I'm curious, and I think Larissa is too, Jeff, about reaching out to the family and gaining their trust, and how you worked with them and their response to the film and how they feel about it now. I mean, can we talk a little bit about
Sure.
The descendants of Traylor and working with them?
Well, I would say it starts a little earlier than the family. I think I went on a lot of listening tours. I spent a lot of time in Montgomery winning the trust of people who lived there, who were suspicious of somebody from the North coming down and doing it. I was taken out to dinner many times and kind of, told not to tread on the Confederacy, or on one hand, or not to miscalculate how complicated the South really is. It's more complicated than it looks, as they say. And so once I started to gain that trust, and that was a very important part, because Montgomery today is growing a little bit, but when I started going there 7-10 years ago, it was a ghost town. There was a parking garage built on top of every site that Bill Traylor had, been involved with, including the corner that he drew on. So I kind of had to establish that first, and then there were two members of the family that were very vocal and had organized the family reunions that I show one of in the movie, and they were kind of the caretakers for the family, and so I made contact with them, and they let me go through their files and really dig deep into that world. And that's kind of how I learned about the lawsuits and those things from their point of view, not from the law's point of view. I heard about all of that from their point of view. And then very close to finishing, we found Frank, who is the great grandson who was actually at the unveiling, he was actually at the funeral of Traylor when his grandmother, Traylor's daughter, was there. And he came out of nowhere and turned into, an amazing guy and character. And once we had him, we were on our way. We were able to find 6 great grandchildren. When we decided we were going to do this unveiling, we helped all of them get down to Montgomery. Some of them drove from Detroit, overnight, because they didn't know where they were going to stay. And we found the motel rooms. And I mean, even that church, it's kind of an amazing story. That church was a branch church in the 1840s on a piece of 2 acres of land given by the plantation owner to the slaves. And they had this branch church that they would pray in, and then a wind would come and it'd get blown away, and they'd build it back up again. And then in 1890, they built the actual church, and that church stood until it was blown away in 1939 by a tornado, and they rebuilt the church exactly the same way. And they only got the deed to the land in 2003, if you can believe that. And a lot of people, even when they migrated up north, they still come back there to be buried. But when we found the church, when we found the gravesite, they couldn't bury anybody. They had 4 people on ice because the land wasn't up to code. So we had to help them get the land up to code. And then we found out there's only 27 members of the church, and literally the choir that sings at the stone laying are all the children who belong to the church. The parents took them all out of school so that they could sing at this event. And, Montgomery embraced them. Their business owners took them out to dinner. We had dinners that were catered for them. They felt, really special. And then not far after that, a couple months after that, I was able to get the city of Montgomery to put up a historical marker on the corner that Bill Traylor worked. It was only the second historical marker of somebody born into slavery erected in the state of Alabama.
Wow.
So, that was something. And, but Montgomery started to see, now they have a Black mayor, and they're starting to see, a growth and something kind of being reborn. And so I think the family's happy about that. They have copyrights on a lot of images, and they've been selling it, merchandising it, and so they're making some money doing that. And they're a wide swath too. They're everything from blue collar to fairly wealthy people. So, they're just a big family. He had a lot of children, and we don't even know. Like, we never got as deep as some of the, the out children that we couldn't really find records of, but they pop up. So I get emails now and again, like, I was a child of Bill Traylor.
I mean, it sounds like that might have been one of the most rewarding things about this project, because here you're dealing with a person who's long gone, long dead, mythic in a way, and you're doing all this investigative work to understand who he was, and it enables you to meet all of these amazing people and have such a impact on their lives.
Well, I'm very family oriented. My last film about James Castle was very much about that the work wouldn't have existed without the family's involvement. And this was one of the words that we've been throwing around a lot, is absence. The word absence. And I'm a Holocaust survivor's parent, or my parents. I've been reading, in the last month when there was all this stuff about Asian life and in America, and I listened to somebody talk about that she could speak. She was Asian. She was Japanese American. She couldn't speak English. I mean, she could speak English, but she couldn't speak Japanese. But she had an absence in her life that link to her past was missing. And so what you see a lot in the culture coming out of the South is that the records weren't kept. The photographs aren't. You have to dig super, super deep to find the photographs. The buildings that you remembered from your youth are gone. So it's very hard for particularly African Americans, I think, in the South to kind of reconstruct, to find that thing that's theirs. And I think Sam was talking about that earlier. I mean, that's starting to happen now. And I think the contemporary artists that Sam did his movie about are showing that in their work, the Sanford Biggers and the Radcliffe Baileys. That ancestry is having a big influence on them.
Well, I think before Sonia wraps us up here, Larissa, did you have any final thoughts or comments or question that you wanted to ask?
There are a couple of questions. I don't know if we have time, but one is about actors in particularly. Was there much direction involved in the actors' beautiful and subtle performance? And I would also like to add, working with actors, did that influence the film in any way? And I'll group them together.
Well, no, let me answer that, because I come out of narrative film. I mean, most of my career is narrative film, and I wanted to show that I had those chops too. So that I wanted to include that as part of the challenge here. And Russell is somebody who I'd seen perform on Broadway several times. And so when I found that he was available, I jumped on him because I actually started a personal relationship with him as well. I just felt like I could communicate with him, because the obvious choice would have gone like for Morgan Freeman or somebody who was like bigger than life. But I wanted somebody who, wasn't like the typical narrator. So yes, there was a lot of direction in that regard. But those actors like Sharon and Russell are used to taking a scene or a poem by Langston Hughes and going home and rehearsing that over and over again. So all I'm doing with them is sort of giving them notes on what they've already prepared in many ways. And I can tell you that we didn't have a lot of time to shoot that stuff. And so, they were very sympathetic to my notes and responded really well. I mean, Sharon's like a super pro and, did a great job. And I was changing lines, in the narration at the last minute. And most actors like to know that stuff ahead of time. So there was a little cue card stuff going on here and there. But yeah, that was so much fun. That was such a great day spending with them. But the one really smart thing we did is we were on a stage and I took them up to a library in this that was kind of quiet, and I had them read all the lines just without camera beforehand, like all the narration and all the poems and everything. So I had it all. I knew I had it in the can before I went to actually shoot.
And one more question. It's from a young student, I believe.
Okay.
Traylor's work feels familiar, and yet it's like something you've never seen before. Why do you think this is?
Could I actually jump in here, Jeffrey? I kind of came on here thinking that we had we're starting to wind down, and then all these great questions came in. But I wonder if I could take this question and wrap it a little bit into my final question. And if I don't do it justice,
sure.
Sam and Jeffrey, feel free to jump in. But I loved how we sort of started with authenticity. I think that's part of the answer to this question about why it feels familiar, but also feels sort of strange and very unusual that great artists are able to hit that note of universal humanity and also something very, very particular. It seemed like it's work that Bill Traylor, he had to make, and that only he could make to some degree. That would be sort of my personal response to his work. But my question, it's a little, I was trying to formulate it while you all were talking, so it's a little long, but so we started with authenticity and talked about, Sam, you talked about history kind of looping around back to Alabama. And we also talked about the canon, this moment of kind of turning a page in the canon and recognizing these quote unquote outsider artists, bringing them in. So my question is it's a kind of a pandemic question. I'm wondering, Jeffrey, Sam, and Larissa too, as a working artist, we're all speculating about what's really changed after this year. The question of whether this film would get made, not if, but how long would it take? And, Bill Traylor's work, it's 90 years since he started making work that we're talking about it, right? So my question is this a good time for artists in terms of passion projects, in terms of getting your work made, in terms of authentic work getting its due? Is that possibly something good, something that's come out of this time, do you think? Or is that always going to be a struggle, a long struggle?
I want to answer Lucy's question, though you gave a really good answer too, but it's kind of like, think of in your art classes, if you give somebody a piece of paper that's about this big, and they have to create something on that piece of paper. And what I like to say about Bill Traylor is that he put big ideas in small spaces. And, and that's really what his, like somebody with his experience in mind and ability is able to do and transmit that across the way. To answer your question, Sonia, which I think is a great one, and I don't necessarily think it's a pandemic question, honestly. Sam and I talk about this all the time. It's places like Film Forum and places like Kino Lorber and other great, progressive companies in our country and around the world being willing to take a chance on telling stories that aren't necessarily part of the mainstream. and or some people would call niche, but in those niche stories and in those interesting stories, there's often like great lessons and ideas to be transmitted. And so, how do you get, everybody has to get on board. The talent agents have to get on board, the managers, the producers, the studios, the distributors have to get out there and help the public understand that this is for their good. I mean, we just went through 4 years of no art in our country. Like, was there any Kennedy Awards presentations during the last presidency? I mean, there was nothing. And so I think there's a lot of time to be made up. And I think, one of the reasons I haven't stopped working on features, but got interested in documentaries is that I started getting sent the same script over and over and over again. Like I could tell on what page certain things were going to happen, and that's what I love about this, is that you actually get to have a personal revelation in some way, and it's why the first film I made and hopefully this next film, I feel that I'll be leaving a legacy of an idea. And because I think certain thoughts will have gone through all 3 films, and hopefully, that'll be something that I can leave behind.
Sonia, this is what I would say. I would say that this last year has been, from a social and political perspective, has been sort of a real awakening for many Americans and also people around the world about the struggles that African Americans have dealt with in this country in terms of systemic racism. From an artistic perspective, what I have seen in this last year is a real, in some ways, again, awakening of saying that the stories of the African American experience are part of the American experience. They need to be told. But the cynical part of me also says that I've been down this road before. And I know there's lots of work for myself and the Stanley Nelsons and the Marco Williamses and the Dawn Porters. But the struggle to make documentaries that have a unique perspective and unique voice will always be a challenge, because there's a certain level of commercialization because of capitalism in America that makes making some of these films that Jeff made, that I make, always difficult to get funded and financed. The doors are opening, but how long will they stay open before they may close again? So if you're out there, and I'm saying this to all my comrades in arms, you're out there being called to make a film, grab it and do it now, because you never know when the things might go.
That's not cynical. That's realism, right? Or
realism.
Leftyism.
Leftyism.
Well, it is a system that kind of goes like this. You just have to get it at the right time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I love what you said, Jeff, about how Traylor had big ideas and in small spaces, explored big ideas in small spaces. And I think relating it back to what Sonia was bringing in, artists, we've been shut down for a year. We've lived to a certain degree in an amount of isolation. I mean, look at all the big ideas we've explored in these tiny little Zoom windows tonight.
Yeah.
So I think that exploring.
Well, I think on Instagram, Bill Traylor has a lot of followers, and I would say 3/4 of them are artists. And every time somebody signs on, I click on their link to see what they're doing, and and they're from all over the world. They're from Iran, Russia. I mean, they're Thailand, and it's kind of fascinating.
Well, all of our worlds, everyone's world has become a little smaller this past year.
Yes.
But hopefully the ideas
also bigger
are getting bigger.
Well, somebody in Thailand can watch this video if you put it on your site. So.
We will
tomorrow.
Yes, so we will be happy to. I think we should probably wrap there. And Larissa, do you have any final thoughts, or would you like to say anything to your community that have been so great to tune in tonight?
Just very quickly, speculation about Lucy's question. Maybe it's the authenticity, the same authenticity we see in the work of our students as art teachers. That's why it feels so familiar in a way, yet so unique. But thank you. This is what I would like to tell you, Sam, Jeffrey, Sonia. Thank you for organizing it. Joe, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for St. Anne's community for joining their department and participating in this event.
Well,
Thank
thanks
you.
to everyone here. And I have a few words of thanks before we wrap. We need to thank Kino Lorber, the film's North American distributor, especially Nick Kemp and Valerie Torres, and everyone on the Film Forum staff who helped put this event together, especially Adam Walker and Mike Majori. If you liked this event, please stay connected to us through our email newsletter and our social media handle, Film Forum NYC, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Again, thanks to everyone on this panel tonight. This was really, really a special, fantastic conversation. And thanks to everyone watching from St. Anne's School. I'm going to say good evening.
Take
Bye,
care.
everyone.
Goodbye, everyone. Have a good night.